Hi, precious and fellow COM 442 classmates. My name is Kori Iverson, and the topic that I've chosen for my midterm and final paper is child marriage in Central African Republic. What is child marriage? UNICEF explains the term child marriage, stating the term child marriage will be used to refer to both formal marriages and informal unions in which a girl lives with a partner as if married before the age of 18. And from what I've found, child marriage has been going on since the dawn of time. Well, maybe not exactly, but for a very long time. Dating back to the 16th century, there's literature and other sources that shows numerous references to child marriage. And prior to the Industrial Revolution, women around the world were often married at an early age, and it was usually soon after reaching puberty, which for a lot of folks is different times, depending on what age you begin and go through puberty. In ancient Greece, early marriage and teenage motherhood for girls existed as well. In 1891, girls were said to remain unmarried for up to 3 years after puberty. However, if a good husband is to be had, this rule may be violated, and a girl can be married prior to puberty. So this was the first kind of outward, kind of law stating that if there was a man and a good husband that could be married, then maybe we can throw the puberty thing off to the side and we can marry a. In 1955 and 1957, these are the earliest references to the term child marriages that emerged in scientific articles. So up until this time, the term child marriage had been introduced through literature, but not necessarily through scientific articles and data collection. And in 1984, the first PubMed article mentioned child marriage in sub-Saharan Africa, which is the part of Africa that I will be telling you about in this project. There are 4 main drivers that contribute to child marriage in Central African Republic, the first of which is gender inequality. So just like most places around the world, there is gender inequality, and that does not change. In fact, it is exemplified in areas where there's a more poverty-stricken and lack of resources for girls and women. Because there is such a low value placed on girls, the desire to control women, and especially young girl sexuality, this patriarchal ideology that girls belong to men and that they will do what men want them to do is exemplified. Younger wives are considered to be better as they are expected to be more obedient and more likely to be a virgin. And girls and women are not seen as vital contributors to the labor force, as many of the trades in rural areas involve manual labor. So they use these kind of tactics and others to kind of beat down girls and women and keep them in their place. There is also a lack of education. So less than a quarter of the female adult population in Central African Republic can read and write. The literacy in this area is so low, and there's lack of technology and lack of education, obviously, that is not helping any girls get ahead or have any sort of equality. There's a valuing. They value boys over girls, and so a lot of times parents will not invest in their daughter's education, even prior to marrying. Daughters will often be held back from school while sons are able to go. And then girls who have little or no education are up to 6 times more likely to be married as children than girls who have secondary schooling. The third cause is poverty. Poverty seems like a pretty simple concept, and it is, and there's also a lot that goes into it. So I'll just briefly go through a few things. The poor families are relieved to have one less mouth to feed or educate, and also clothe. When there's multiple children, being able to marry one off and let one go, and to have one more dollar in your pocket. It's pretty brutal, but it is life for a lot of folks in these countries. And then families will often receive a dowry or a bride price for the sale of their daughter. A dowry then come in the form of a herd, some goats, or it can be an actual monetary amount for the price of their daughter, for the sale of their child. And men with multiple wives will often use their wives as free labor, essentially using them as slaves, so that the wives themselves are not making any sort of monetary gains in any sort of skilled labor force that they would choose. There are also cultural and or religious beliefs that are in play here. Polygamy is pretty big in these countries. And then under the country's legal code, men can take up to 4 wives and oftentimes do so, if not more. Younger wives are seen to increase the social status bestowed on a family. And oftentimes with polygamy as well, as the wives age up, the husbands will marry younger wives to keep them in that social status. And then there's also the social stigma of not following tradition that ensures the practice continues. There's, whether it's religious, cultural, community oriented, there are reasons that folks believe that they have to live a certain way and do a certain thing. And child marriage in these areas is one of those things, unfortunately. And with cause comes the effects. The effects can be pretty dire depending on the age of the child that is married. I imagine that the mental health piece here would, in theory, affect a younger bride a little bit more than an older bride, just as the younger age girls don't know what they're doing. They don't have the life experience, whereas the older ones may have gone to school. They may have a little more of an education. They may be able to take care of their siblings in a way that a younger child would not. So sometimes the child is entering an entirely unknown situation, which can be very scary and depressing and very stressful. And then oftentimes, regardless of age, the child brides are taken away to new cities or villages where they know no one. They don't know anyone. And so they're just basically leaving behind any life that they previously knew. Just as the cause of lack of education, it also is an effect as well. Once girls are married off, there is a very low chance that they are going to become any more educated or literate in any way. And when a girl's education is cut short, they lose the chance to learn the knowledge and skills they need to secure a good job and provide for themselves and their families, which also leads into labor force participation, that the removal of girls from education at such a young age doesn't grant them those opportunities. And so they aren't able to participate in any economic growth for both their families and their communities. One of the more harrowing effects is the sexual abuse and disease that can come along with being a child bride. Domestic violence by an intimate partner is more prevalent and more severe amongst girls who marry as children, likely because the children, as stated in the last slide, don't know what they're doing. They're children. For many girls, child marriages subject them to rape and abuse for the rest of their lives. And then the lack of access to sexual and reproductive health and rights information puts them at a higher risk of contracting sexual transmitted diseases, including HIV. They don't have a lot of, the health system isn't set up in these places to take care of any sexual and reproductive health issues. So if any issue arises disease-wise, Those are things that can become untreated and then eventually you could perish from. And then many young girls are the subject of female genital mutilation and cutting. And then, of course, once able to bear children, there is the possibility of complicated pregnancy and or deliveries. Early childbearing puts girls' lives at risk and increases the chance of stillbirth, infant mortality, and disabling complications. Because these girls' bodies aren't necessarily ready to bear children. They may have gone through puberty, but as we know, as women, there's a lot more that happens in the time after puberty that gets us to a place in which childbirth is safe and or safer for our bodies. And then pregnancy is the leading cause of death worldwide for women 15 to 19. Here is just a quick demographic slide to show you just kind of the population of Central African Republic is it's approximately 5.2 million, and 26% of girls are or children are married by the age of 15, and 61% of children are married by the age of 18. I did not mention necessarily that boys are involved in this. However, it is at a much lower percentage. And then in my final paper, I will kind of go over that as well. And I also wanted to note here that more than 67% of the population lives in extreme poverty. This will be kind of an ongoing trend with Central African Republic and the lack of education and the lack of resources. There have been many conventions and legislation and laws that have been enacted to kind of battle this child marriage situation that's happening globally and also in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm not going to go into all of these, but a lot of them have to do with just human rights and what that means, child rights, slavery rights, the age to consent to marriage, and then also, discrimination of women and girls and the rights of the people of this country. Yeah. And what we can do here to build a better framework and a protocol in ensuring that these girls' lives are not destroyed because they have to undergo, the pressures at such a young age of being a wife and a bride and a mom and hopefully, live to see it through. And as I move forward with this topic into my final paper, I'd like to find a bit more about the history of child marriage, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. There isn't a ton. A lot of it is it's global, and then there's kind of a subsection of information. But there's a lot more information on other areas, and so maybe it would have been easier to choose an area that was more well known. But I was really interested in this specific country because there are correlations between infant mortality, maternal mortality, and also the poverty levels that just kind of show that there's that lack of education. And if we can figure out a way to educate these girls and these parents and the people of this country, and maybe stimulate some economic growth, that there is a possibility for these girls to become educated and to have a life that they're excited about.